Greenland may appear on the map as a giant white mass of ice sitting quietly at the top of the world, but history shows that this frozen island has never truly been ignored by powerful nations. Long before modern satellites, missiles, or climate change debates, Greenland was already shaping global strategy. For centuries, it was seen as a remote frontier, a harsh land where survival itself was a challenge. Vikings arrived more than 1,000 years ago, establishing small settlements along Greenland's rugged coastline. They were drawn by hunting grounds, fishing waters, and trade routes stretching across the North Atlantic. Those settlements eventually vanished, defeated by climate shifts and isolation, but Greenland itself never disappeared from strategic thinking. By the 18th century, Denmark formally claimed Greenland, not because it was wealthy or populated, but because controlling Greenland meant controlling access to the North Atlantic. Even then, geography mattered more than people, and Greenland's power begins with that geography. It is the world's largest island, covering more than 2.1 million square kilometers, yet over 80% of it is buried beneath ice. This ice sheet is so vast that in places it is more than 3 kilometers thick, pressing the land beneath it below sea level. If all of Greenland's ice were to melt, global sea levels would rise by over 7 meters, redrawing coastlines across the planet and flooding many of the world's major cities. This alone makes Greenland not just a regional concern, but a global one. Geographically, Greenland sits at a crossroads of the Northern Hemisphere. To the west lies Canada, separated by the narrow waters of Baffin Bay and the Davis Strait. To the east stretches the North Atlantic Ocean, reaching toward Iceland, less than 300 kilometers away at its closest point. To the north lies the Arctic Ocean, once locked in ice year-round, now increasingly navigable during summer months. And to the south, Greenland faces the open Atlantic routes leading directly toward Europe and the eastern United States. Few places on Earth are positioned so perfectly between major powers. This location explains why Greenland has always been more valuable as a place to watch, detect, and control, rather than to populate. Any aircraft, missile, or satellite traveling between North America and Europe passes close to Greenland's airspace. Any submarine moving between the Arctic and the Atlantic must consider the waters surrounding it. In military terms, Greenland is a natural choke point. In climate terms, it is a planetary thermostat. In economic terms, it is a vault of resources locked beneath ice. Fast forward to the 20th century, and Greenland's importance suddenly became impossible to ignore. During World War II, when Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, Greenland was cut off from its colonial ruler. The United States stepped in, not out of charity, but out of necessity. American leaders understood that if Germany gained a foothold in Greenland, it could threaten Atlantic shipping lanes and control critical weather data. The U.S. quickly built airfields and weather stations on the island, marking the beginning of America's permanent strategic relationship with Greenland. This was not about conquest. It was about control of space, air, and information. Weather data collected in Greenland helped Allied forces plan bombing raids, naval movements, and the D-Day invasion itself, proving that ice and wind could influence the outcome of a global war. When World War II ended, another conflict began almost immediately: the Cold War. This time the battlefield was not just land or sea, but the sky above the Arctic. Missiles, bombers, and later nuclear weapons could travel over the pole faster than any other route. Greenland suddenly became one of the most critical locations on Earth. In the early 1950s, the United States built Thule Air Base in northern Greenland, a massive installation designed to detect Soviet bombers and missile launches as early as possible. For decades, it functioned as a silent guardian, watching the polar skies day and night. Most people never heard of it, but its presence was central to preventing nuclear war. Greenland was no longer a forgotten island. It was a shield protecting North America. At the same time, Greenland itself was changing. Indigenous Inuit communities, who had lived on the island for thousands of years, now lived alongside one of the most advanced military systems on Earth. Danish control tightened during the Cold War, but by the late 20th century, Greenlanders began demanding greater autonomy. In 1979, Greenland gained home rule, followed later by expanded self-government. This arrangement gave Greenland control over its natural resources, while Denmark retained authority over defense and foreign policy. That balance remains crucial today. Greenland can decide who mines its land, but it cannot fully control the military presence of powerful allies like the United States. When the Cold War ended, many believed Greenland's strategic importance would fade. The Soviet Union collapsed, tensions eased, and military budgets shrank. For a brief moment, Greenland slipped back into the background. But history has a way of repeating itself, especially when climate change and technology rewrite the rules. In the early 21st century, scientists began warning that Arctic ice was melting at unprecedented speeds. What once seemed impossible, open water in the Arctic, was becoming reality. Ice that had protected and isolated Greenland for thousands of years was now retreating, exposing land, minerals, and sea routes. This is where the modern competition truly begins. Beneath Greenland's ice lie rare earth minerals, uranium, iron ore, and potentially oil and gas. Rare earths are especially critical. Without them, there are no smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, satellites, or advanced weapon systems. In today's world, control over resources is control over power, and Greenland's resources represent independence, leverage, and security. For the United States, the return of great power rivalry made Greenland relevant again almost overnight. As Russia rebuilt its military and China rose as a global power, American strategists realized the Arctic was no longer a frozen buffer. It was a new front line. The U.S. upgraded radar systems, expanded diplomatic ties, and increased investment in Greenlandic infrastructure. The controversial suggestion that the U.S. could buy Greenland reflected a deeper truth. American leaders see Greenland as essential to national survival, not optional. China's interest developed more quietly. Lacking a military presence in the Arctic, China arrived through science, trade, and investment. Chinese researchers studied Arctic ice and navigation, while companies explored mining opportunities, especially rare earth projects that could secure China's technological dominance. Beijing also recognized that Arctic shipping routes could reshape global trade, saving weeks of travel time between Asia and Europe. China calls this vision the Polar Silk Road. Greenland, sitting at the edge of these future routes, becomes a natural partner. Ports, research stations, and infrastructure projects are not just economic investments. They are instruments of influence. Western governments fear that economic dependence could eventually turn into political leverage. Russia, meanwhile, never stopped thinking about the Arctic. For Moscow, the Arctic is central to national security. Nuclear submarines patrol beneath the ice, and Greenland's location threatens that secrecy. From Russia's perspective, Greenland is a NATO watchtower overlooking its most sensitive military routes. In response, Russia has reopened old Soviet bases, deployed new missile systems, and expanded its icebreaker fleet. While it cannot control Greenland directly, it watches every development closely, often aligning with China to challenge Western dominance in the Arctic. What makes Greenland's situation unique is that all of this competition surrounds a small population that never asked to become the center of global rivalry. Greenlanders face difficult choices. Foreign interest brings jobs and investment, but also environmental risks, political pressure, and dependence. Ultimately, Greenland's story is not just about ice or minerals. It is about how climate change is reshaping global power. The Arctic is no longer the edge of the map. It is the center of a new geopolitical contest. For the United States, Greenland is a shield. For China, it is an opportunity. For Russia, it is a strategic challenge. No discussion of Greenland's future would be complete without acknowledging the country that currently legally owns it, Denmark. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, and Copenhagen has repeatedly reaffirmed its sovereignty. Denmark has also strengthened its Arctic defense ties with European NATO allies, conducting military exercises in Greenland and deepening cooperation to protect the island from external pressure. Diplomatically, Denmark is resisting external attempts to alter Greenland's political status. Danish and Greenlandic leaders have made it clear that Greenland's future should be decided by Greenlanders, whether that means continued autonomy, independence, or something else. Importantly, Polls show that a large majority of Greenlanders prefer remaining associated with Denmark rather than becoming part of another country such as the United States. Greenlanders also support independence only if living standards can be maintained. However, Greenlanders have repeatedly rejected the idea of being sold to another nation. And for the world, it is a warning that the future of global competition may be decided not in crowded cities, but in the quiet, melting ice of the far north. At present, no single country looks likely to outright take control of Greenland by force. Denmark's sovereignty and Greenlanders' own preferences remain powerful obstacles to any unilateral takeover. However, influence is a different matter. The United States, driven by strategic security and resource interests, is the most likely power to deepen its control over Greenland's future, legally and politically. China could become a major economic partner and influence builder. Russia will continue to contest Western dominance in the Arctic. The real story of Greenland in the decades ahead is not one of conquest, but of competition, where economic investment, military presence, diplomatic pressure, and local choices all shape the island's destiny. And in that contest, every major power will have a stake, not just for Greenland, but for the future of the Arctic and global geopolitics itself. So what happens if foreign powers escalate their interest in Greenland? The consequences could be profound. Even without formal control, the United States could expand its military infrastructure, turning Greenland into a central hub of Arctic defense, while China responds by increasing its naval, scientific, and research presence, and Russia strengthens its northern military posture, collectively transforming the Arctic into a zone of intense strategic competition. At the same time, economic influence could become a powerful tool. If China or Western countries dominate Greenland's mining and resource sectors, they could shape not only the island's economy, but also its political direction, forcing Greenland into a delicate balancing act between development, sovereignty, and dependence. This external pressure could fuel a political tug-of-war within Greenland itself, polarizing opinion between pro-Western, pro-independence, and pro-neutral camps, with Denmark playing a crucial but constrained role as Greenlanders ultimately decide their own future. As global rivalries deepen, particularly between the United States and China, or NATO and Russia, Greenland could emerge as a geopolitical flashpoint where full-scale conflict remains unlikely, but diplomatic crises, strategic standoffs, and proxy competition become increasingly plausible.